When MechAssault came out in 2002, nobody knew for sure that the MechWarrior franchise was, for all intents and purposes, dead. It's important to keep that in mind in order to understand MechAssault in context. In 2002, MechAssault wasn't the new face of Battletech, it was just a diversion from the main series. A MechWarrior Gaiden, if you'll pardon the temporary lapse into weeb shit. MechAssault was still the victim of a bunch of knee-jerk backlash from tabletop diehards and PC diehards alike, who I guess demand that all works within an IP are exactly the same all the time. As you can tell from my derisive tone and all these snide remarks I'm sneaking into the script, I don't share those opinions. In my estimation, MechAssault was not some new betrayal, but just another in a series of Battletech games on home consoles, dating back to Genesis and Super Nintendo. MechAssault was developed by Day One Studio, with an unknown amount of input and assistance from FASA Studios, and was released in 2002 for only the original Xbox. Remember that Microsoft Game Studios was a juggernaut around the turn of the century. MechAssault is the true MechWarrior Arcade Edition. Remember the MechWarrior 2 Arcade Combat Edition that some perennial optimists squoze down onto the PS1 and Saturn? That abortion of a game retained probably the maximum amount of complexity from its parent game, and it chugged dick harder than Johnny Oldschool. You can make a competent arcade mech game on the system, like Armored Core. That game isn't a compromised port of anything, it's a purpose-built console mech action game, and better for it. You can even make a good console MechWarrior game, provided you don't adhere too closely to formula and accept the constraints or limitations of the platform. So on that note, MechAssault is more of a successor to Battletech, the isometric mech action game on the Genesis, later ported to the Super Nintendo as MechWarrior 3050 after the release of Mech 2. As critical shorthand, I'd compare the game to the Desert Strike series, though nowhere near as good. The Super NES also saw an earlier port of MechWarrior 1 from the PC, which suffers from the same kind of controls pile-up as Mech 2 Arcade Combat Edition. Battletech on the Genesis is a pretty decent game. You get plunked down in a big map and you have to walk around destroying objectives in sequence, pretty much exactly like Desert Strike. The game even features a co-op mode where one player controls mech movement and the other player controls gunnery. The split co-op control idea was so spectacularly good that it didn't resurface until PsyOps on the Xbox. This is a story for another video obviously, but my buddy Code Knight and I played through the entire game in that mode. Those were the blurst of times indeed. The plot of MechAssault is sort of a stripped-down version of MechWarrior 3. You're part of a mercenary strike team that embarks on a campaign against a world held by a bunch of religious zealots, only to get shot down and have to put the band back together behind enemy lines. The difference is that the basic story has been transposed to the beginning of the Jihad era, and I'll just tell you I'm not a fan of the Jihad era at all. It's so early 2000s it hurts. The Word of Blake are a sect of Comstar that takes over the whole galaxy using suicide bombings, chemical weapons, and religious brainwashing, before eventually being stopped by a task force put together by the Coalition consisting of Intersphere and Clan Warriors finally working together. Tango down Foot Mobile's Oscar Mike How copy. On the surface, Word of Blake seems like a pretty lame stab at being topical and ripped from the headlines following 9/11 and the dual invasions of Iraq and Afghanistan. But it was actually introduced to Battletech, I think, in the early 90s. I didn't know that at the time, and my perceptions of the Word of Blake storyline were pretty negative as a result. In hindsight, it's still pretty lame, but not as bad as the Dark Age that followed. We'll talk about that later. The game does have a bit too much early 2000s Tood. Early Double Aughts Tood was a different animal than 90s Tood, and as a Tood connoisseur, I'm eminently qualified to speak about this. See, in the 90s, Tood was all about how you were a cool guy, pushing it to the limit, being extreme, slamming back a do and hitting the skate park with no helmet because don't have a cow, mom. Tood in the early Double Aughts was a lot more obnoxious, if you'll believe it. Double Aughts Tood was a big load of innuendo delivered with a smirk. If Double Aughts Tood had a face, you would feel compelled to slap it. MechAssault's contemporaneous Tood is on display throughout, starting with the random hot chick you see in the opening cutscene and then not again until the end of the game. Your commander lady is just the voice in your ear. I'm not sure why they couldn't make her look more commanderly. I don't want to take orders from somebody's rebellious kid sister. She's got a heroin chic thing going on too, which is off-putting, because I'm not Lane fucking Staley.
Just you, me, briefing boy here, a handful of pilots, and some of your favorite toys. You up for this?
When the video games in the Double Aughts tried to be sexy and cool, all of a sudden it kinda ruined sex and coolness. They tried to keep the banter fun, sexy, and light, but your commanding officer is annoying, and the briefing boy tech guy is annoying. I know kids on YouTube are big into the word cringe these days, and I hesitate to use it, but it's very apropos.
Who wants some? Come and get a little bit of Foster! Ah, what I would give for radio silence.
MechAssault controls like a third-person shooter, and the mission structure is like a straightforward action game. The levels are mostly linear, and you get access to more mechs as you progress. The story is moved along by mission dialogue and audio briefings between missions. It's simple, but it works, and I find myself preferring it to the interstitial cutscenes that were so popular at the time. I wouldn't describe the controls as simplified, because that implies they were reduced in some form from a more complicated template. Instead, the controls are just ground-up third-person shooter controls. Left stick move, right stick aim, jump jet button, ability button, trigger, and weapon groups. Nice and clean. Weapons are automatically grouped by type, missile, energy, or ballistic. You cycle between them with left trigger and shoot with right trigger. Mechs can't have more than one of each type of weapon system, but they can have up to 4 of that weapon in the group. For example, the Mad Cat's energy group is 2 PPCs, and the missile group is 4 LRMs. There is no customization, but it wouldn't really improve the style of the game. Instead, you pick from the roster of chassis, and each one has an alternate config. For the clan mechs, the primary config is named after the Innersphere reporting name of the chassis, and the alternate name is the clan name. That's an alright way to go. For the other mechs, the alternate names are usually borrowed from other chassis with an appropriately similar loadout. Like, the alternate configuration of the Cougar, which carries PPCs, is called the Puma. It's a good way to get more mech variety out of a smaller roster of mech models. And for a simple, fast game like this, I really don't mind. There's no location damage, just an armor bar, and the heat levels are simplified in a way that works and keeps the game fast. If your heat max is out, you can't shoot. Simple and effective. The weapons are all pretty well represented too. You've got beam lasers, pulse lasers, and PPCs that you can charge up manually for increased damage and homing ability. This is actually kind of how PPCs seem to be portrayed in Battletech lore. Maybe I'm misunderstanding that. Oh well. On the ballistic front, you have machine guns, autocannon, and Gauss rifles. Contrary to the MechWarrior tradition, machine guns do generate heat for balance reasons. If you were weaned on MechWarrior 2 like I was, it's a pain in the taintal region to have your machine guns get locked out when heat levels are too high. Like in some other mech games, a direct hit from a brace of leveled up autocannons or Gauss rifles can knock a mech down, which can pair well with a high damage weapon that's otherwise hard to connect with. On the missile front, you've got short-range missiles, long-range missiles, and the Hammer missile, which sort of approximates the T-bolt missiles of other mech games. The Hammer missile charges up and sticks to enemies before exploding with high damage. It's kind of odd conceptually, but it's a fun gameplay mechanic. The alternate variant of the catapult mounts 2 of them, and it's probably my favorite mech in the game. Most mechs also have a special ability, which can be things like radar jamming, cloaking, or throwing out a flare to defeat homing missiles. It really does hit the sweet spot of complexity for this style of game. Salvage is represented in the game by color-coded power-ups. Stacks of radioactive green armor plates refill your health, and weapon-specific power-ups increase the level of their respective weapon type. The leveled-up versions of weapons have limited ammo, and when you run out they revert back to their previous level. It's non-canon, it's vastly simplified over the previous games in the tabletop, and it's fine. Real MechWarrior games are my jam, you should know that by now, but keep 2 things in mind. 1, this wasn't the only Battletech game out at the time. And 2, MechAssault doesn't claim to be MechWarrior. It's called MechAssault. The action focus is right there in the name. And MechAssault definitely gets a lot right. One thing is the graphics. There's nice rain effects, mechs glow from their reactor when they're about to die. You can see the physical heat sinks on the mech and they glow when your heat levels are high. MechAssault also gets the visuals and scale of city destruction right. Kicking trucks into buildings is basically the funnest thing ever, but you can also feel the weight of your mech whenever you crash into a building and see a bunch of glass panes explode. Destructible level objects and buildings in the city levels really make them a lot of fun to fight in. Unfortunately, the end of the game does get pretty grindy, and the fun coastal city combat of the early levels gives way to Volcano Marathon the Musical. Smoke and lava everywhere you look. Kinda reminds me of Genome. Because the way the game's progression is scaled up, it also means that you never really get to use the heavy mechs in those early city environments. As you fight the Word of Blake to kill time while your commander lady tries to find the rest of your unit, you learn the reason the Word of Blake are on the planet is because of a super secret badass prototype mech called the Ragnarok, with an impenetrable energy shield and a lava cannon. Oh, Jesus. Yeah, this is kind of bullshit. The last few levels are a race against time to stop the Word of Blake's doomsday machine and defeat the Ragnarok. And the whole time you have to listen to what I assume is supposed to be a budding romance between you and your weird commander girlfriend, who calls you a lot of weird names, like Captain, MechWarrior, Sport, Cowboy, At the end of the game, you defeat the Word of Blake commander in his Ragnarok, steal a backup Ragnarok, then use that to self-destruct and destroy the Ragnarok end of the world machine, and transition into a really awkward end cutscene. The ejection pod flies out of the explosion, and the fate of the captain/sport/cowboy is unknown, for the duration of a 2-second crossfade of the captain walking back onto the bridge.
We thought you were taking the dirt nap for sure. Nice trick.
Sirs?
Your cockpit carried you out of that inferno and straight back to our loving arms.
The rest of the Dragoons, who apparently were totally fine, wage an awesome-sounding cleanup operation against the Word of Blake. Boy, I sure would have rather played through that than fuck around in a volcano for 3 hours.
So congratulations. We've earned our pay and a permanent place on the Word of Blake list.
Ugh. Your reward for playing this is some winky-winky stuff from your commander girlfriend, bizarre physical comedy from Briefing Boy and his team,
I wonder if the enemy...
and a bit of a sequel hook, I guess.
Question is, are you ready for this, sport?
There's really not a lot of story in this game, and not a lot of storytelling between missions. The plot gets moved along in mission via some pretty stripped-down dialogue between your CO lady and the squeaky-voiced teen mechanic. Honestly, I'd recommend playing through MechAssault on easy. It makes the game into a fun arcade shooter. Any harder and it becomes a bit tedious because the enemies just have too much health. Also, I don't rate most of the levels as being interesting enough to warrant multiple playthroughs, so if you die near the end and have to repeat a stage, it's pretty demoralizing. In real MechWarrior games, if you fail a mission, it's an opportunity to try again with tactics and loadouts tailored to the challenge. In MechAssault, it's basically just, well, I guess I'll try again. MechAssault does have a multiplayer mode, which is limited but a lot of fun. The Grinder mode is really fun in local split-screen multiplayer. You and a buddy fight against waves of increasingly heavy mechs, and every time you finish off a wave, more simultaneous mechs are added. There are only 2 maps, and the Coliseum map is useless, but that River City map is the shit. My buddy Code Knight and I played this for way more hours than was healthy or productive. MechAssault got a sequel, MechAssault 2 Lone Wolf in 2004, and a handheld spin-off called Phantom War for the Nintendo DS in 2006. Phantom War is a pretty solid little handheld title, but not really worth covering in depth. I'm not going to show it because camera footage is an abortion and I don't emulate anymore. Not because I'm better than you, I think I'm just lazy. I will talk more about MechAssault 2. The new feature in Lone Wolf is the ability to hop out of your mech to get in other vehicles like a tank or VTOL or a suit of power armor that allows you to hijack other mechs. Best of all is that Lone Wolf's planet-hopping plot allows for a greater variety of level environments, which really helps to keep things fresh versus the first game. The plot is still kinda lame. Your Briefing Boy and your seductive commanding lady both return, and there are lots of cutscenes in between missions to tell the story. The story doesn't feel much like MechWarrior, but the missions kinda do. One great mission has you assisting Kurita fire bases in a marsh, then gathering and leading an armor column against an enemy base. It's a great arcade interpretation of some classic MechWarrior action. The story is very bizarre though, and it's pretty well summed up by the game's subtitle. As you are reminded in the cutscenes, you're the only MechWarrior on the team, and you're operating without Wolf's Dragoon's support or oversight. There are also a lot of missions that serve as an introduction to Lone Wolf's expanded multiplayer offering. The majority of the new mechanics in MechAssault 2 are first and foremost for the multiplayer game modes. I never got a chance to play the game on Xbox Live, but from what I can gather it was a pretty rockin' time. Mech jacking adds a bit of a Halo 2 element, or if you're a true OG, a bit of a genome element. The VTOL can rapidly transport battle armor into combat or set up mini-turrets, or deliver salvage power-ups to friendly mechs. The tank serves as a bit of a sniper. In most of the single-player campaign, the mech jacking is used as a quick intro segment to a mission. You jack a mech once and then complete the rest of the stage in a mech. Unlike in Genome, you can't eject from a mech and jack another one. You have to be in the battlesuit. So after you jack that first mech, you have to hop out of the battlesuit and get in the mech, after which you just leave the battlesuit behind. It would have been weird if they let you into a mech while still wearing the battlesuit, but that could have been an opportunity for more interesting gameplay. You are pretty fragile in the battlesuit, but ridiculously mobile thanks to jump jets and the ability to latch onto surfaces with the claw hand. Lone Wolf doesn't create quite the same level of tension as Genome does, because being in a battlesuit isn't a death sentence. And there's basically no way to switch mechs in combat. Being on foot is just sort of a bridge between different segments of a mission. Lone Wolf even has some mandatory stealth segments where you have no armor and have to sneak around and plant satchel charges or hack doors while on foot. These aren't particularly well integrated with the gameplay, but they make for a nice scripted set piece or a bit of atmosphere. I gotta say, both of these games are really good, and I think MechAssault 2 has some real improvements over the first game. It's great stuff up until you start fighting a giant boss spider mech while the sweet refrain of Papa Roach's "Who Gives a Shit" plays in the background. God, look at that cover, featuring music from Korn and Papa Roach. Fuck you, Tribal Fusion Electronica. Move over, orchestral score. Say hello to Butt Rock, the new sound of the franchise. I had a pretty similar outlook on the inclusion of Incubus on the Halo 2 soundtrack, at least until I heard the fourth movement of the Odyssey. Yeah, Korn and Papa fucking Roach ain't no Incubus. MechAssault didn't rape my childhood. It made me feel a bit confused, which I certainly didn't need in my awkward teenage years, but whatever, it was fun. It was a console mech action game that actually fucking worked. Do I need to remind you about Arcade Combat Edition again? Well, like I said, MechAssault is the true Arcade Combat Edition. It gets the feel and the scale right while controlling beautifully on a console. There was no attempt to shoehorn a PC game into the Xbox. This is a purpose-built Xbox game. It does feel at times like a third-person shooter with robots for characters, but if that's the worst thing I can say about it, that's not bad at all. At the end of the day, it's fun as shit to smash your mech into a wall of plate glass windows or step on little word-of-like fanatical infantrymen. After MechAssault 2 in 2004, and ignoring the handheld spin-off of a spin-off in 2006, the MechWarrior franchise was pretty much over. A trailer was released in 2009 for what was assumed to be MechWarrior 5, but we'll talk about that debacle next time. Thanks for watching. See you later. I was not but a tadpole back then, so I didn't keep up with the fan reaction to Battletech getting an isometric action game on home consoles. Most 4-year-olds don't have access to Usenet. That line is out of place in the script here. God damn it, I didn't finish the script. It's important to keep that in mind in order to understand MechAssault in context. In 2002, MechAssault wasn't... What the fuck? In 2002... Oh, shit. Start all the way over. See, in the 90s, Tude was all about how you were a cool guy pushing it to the limit, being extreme, slamming back a do and hitting the skate park with no helmet because don't have a cow, mom. Tude... I don't know. When did I write this? God, this reads like something I wrote at 3 o'clock in the morning.